because here we have a few more guests, and maybe we need to pull out a few more chairs. In the meantime,
this is a half hour or an hour.
Yeah.
About 45 minutes.
Everybody settle in.
Must have been my mom's side.
Welcome to the Art Center and to the Art Talk of Artwork in the Corinne Woodman Gallery. My name is Hester Koek. I'm the curator here, and I had about 2% to do something with this show. And for the rest, the artist and an exhibition committee member took care of it. Beautiful. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Mel Archer. He is an artist that makes use of things that we don't really want. Glass shards, broken glass. So I'm going to give him the microphone. If you have any questions for him, please stick up your hand. I'm going to see it, and I'll give you the opportunity to ask the question. It is an informal talk, but I think Mel has a lot to tell us.
Thank you, Hester. And welcome to Broken Glass.
So I'm looking here at my phone, not because I'm bored, but because I'm starting the stopwatch. So we won't talk too long. I won't talk too long. I meant to show now this stopwatch. That card. And that show is up through February 19. As with all art, you have to see it in person. But that's it for now. Mel, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Okay, how I became an artist. So, I pretty much think I've been an artist all my life. I can remember entering a poster contest in 3rd grade. Now, my father was an artist in Hollywood, and he saw me struggling along. And so one evening he took over. And so I wound up winning that contest and had to admit in front of all of my other elementary school students that I actually wasn't that artist. But it propelled me to do more art things. And I always have loved art, and probably because of my father's influence. And in 7th grade, I had an art teacher, Mrs. Kroom, who saw that I had something, and she kind of, nowadays we would call it mentored. She just kind of promoted what I was doing, and that really propelled me to want to do it. So that was the beginning of the art. And then my wife and I got married, and kids started coming along. I was actually in California College of Arts and Crafts at the time that our first son was announcing he's on his way. And so the fine art took a backseat, and I started working in fine cabinetry and did that for 40 years and incorporated the art into the cabinetry. Didn't realize it at the time that we were creating something really unique, that we were. And the clients in Portland recognized what we were doing, and they started coming into our showroom in Hillsborough and I wouldn't go out of my way to do the real artistic cabinetry because it is expensive, but there was some clients who said, go all the way. And that caused me to go farther. So that was a lot of the momentum. And then somewhere along in there, I created a series of really crazy vanities called radial fusion. saw that there was people in the Portland area doing really custom glasswork, and I wanted to incorporate their glasswork into my cabinets. So I created 6 4-foot wide, really crazy vanities, and incorporated glass either into the face of the doors or as the countertop or the mirrors. At one point I had decided that the mirror didn't really need to have a good reflection, it'd rather be artsy, but then I changed my mind. And that got me involved in seeing these other artists doing their glasswork. And I was, I guess you'd call it entranced by their glasswork. So that would have been in 2005 or so. And I wound up taking 4 classes in a row at Bullseye, beginning cutting, beginning fusing, slumping, and then the last one, painting with light. And I was just taken. And that really, probably 6 months after that, I bought a kiln and I started doing it. And I just kept on doing it.
What attracts you so much in glass? I mean, it would be much easier to paint these pictures, right?
But it was the glass that caught my attention. I had done some painting and some drawing and stuff like that previously, but the glass is just really something. So these little pieces here on my left were my very beginning pieces, and I was using Bullseye standard stock colors. They have, at that time, about 35. And I tried to make, I was copying other paintings. This one right here is a copy of Monet's, I think it's called Sailboats on the Argentine River. And I was doing my best to do what I could. But the colors just really aren't working. So I was doing, you can see, I was trying to do paintings with the glass.
You want me to hold this up?
Okay. So what Hester is showing is I started blending my own glass. These are stock Bullseye colors, and the sheets on my right are my own blends with formulas and samples, and I have over 2,000 blends. And it took me a long, long time. I don't know if this will show up, but it took 6 years to do this one painting because I was teaching myself the techniques on how to do it and to get the layers and layers. Brian probably remembers, we were here. And by doing that, and that's also on the front of the card, by doing that, it caused me to realize that I actually could paint with glass, and nothing but glass. It's not, there's no enamels, there's no nothing, it's nothing but bits of glass.
So what makes the glass so special? Is it the color, or?
So what makes the glass special? Well, one of the things that really caused me to realize it was special is when we visited the Vatican, and many years ago, and just an enormous building, and there's niches for each dead pope. And above each crypt is a painting, large, very large, embedded in the wall, and it's glass mosaic. And it's lasted since the year 400. And that really caught my attention, that glass, not only does it have this wonderful quality of reflecting light and things, but it's enduring. So I've actually taken some of my pieces and I've hung them outside through 2 winters of Central Oregon with no effect.
So glass can break, but for the rest it's pretty sturdy.
I didn't hear you.
Glass can break, but
Right.
for the rest it's really sturdy.
Yeah, the glass is fragile. You have to teach it that it can break at any time, or teach yourself. The pieces that I've hung outside are half covered by the overhang of the roof, and the other half is in the brilliant Central Oregon sunshine. And they've gone through 2 really harsh winters, so the breakage part is mostly in the handling, and I haven't really experienced that. Although it is a thing to contend with, and I know of a piece. It was a $90,000 commission by a glass artist in Portland. And they hung it up, and it all happened during the winter when it was all foggy. And the very first sunny day, Ray, the actual maker of the glass, went over to watch it crack, and it cracked right in front of him. So it's not a proven thing. Be careful.
It's probably depending on size.
Well, and
the bigger, the more prone to cracking in such a.
I think it has to do with the thickness. So that piece was over 1 inch thick. The pieces I've done are similar to what I have on the walls here. And the glass can't handle the temperature change. So if it was cold and shadowed by the roof overhang, and then the sun comes out and hits it with the radiant energy, that energy is going to be absorbed in there to the point where it's not, and then it wants to let go.
So what is the most exciting moment for you when you start or finish an artwork?
Oh, the exciting moment. So opening up the kiln, I think we have some glass workers here. It's like Christmas. So just before I came over here, I have 4 pieces in my large kiln right now. And when we get home, I'm going to open that up and I'm going to go, oh, it worked. So that's really, and to be able to see the whole situation kind of come to what I visualized. And the reason that piece took so long, I had it in my head, but it took 6 years to get it to that, of trying this and trying that and mixing colors. So the whole thing is pretty exciting. I'll easily spend 5 or 6 hours in the studio a day, and it seems like, wasn't it lunchtime?
Tell us a little bit about your process. How do you start and how do you continue? How does it work?
Okay, so I work from photos that I've taken or I've collected. I've come to realize that I really want my work to look like watercolors. I'm not really sure why. I love watercolors. I love the fact that it can fade out to white. And so I've tried to gear my work aiming in that direction. So I work on a sheet of 4mm white glass, and I will transfer the image from the photograph onto the glass all by hand. And I realize I'm not trying to make a photograph on glass. I'm creating art on glass. And I work from the rear, so visually I look at the photo and I work from the rearmost plane, which is always the sky, towards the front. And so on the sheet of white glass, I am working on the sky. And then I fire that. And when I get it out of the kiln, I might decide to do more sky. Some of the pieces I fire 3 times just for sky, if I want to get really big clouds.
Do you have to stop after each color?
So if I understand the question, in between each firing, it cools down, and then I start up again. Was that?
So if you have a sky with white, light blue, and dark blue, do you first have to do the light blue, then fire it, then cool, and then you can add the dark blue? Or can you say, well, the dark blue and the light blue are not really in the same spots. I could do it in one shot.
Yeah. So it's an awkward thing. So the broken glass from the factory is called frit, and I have some jars over here and then little tubs of mine that I blended from those 2 factory colors. So frit comes in 5 different sizes. The finest size is called powder, and I use it for the skies to create a seamless color variation. So there won't be any distinction between each piece of frit because it's as fine as talcum powder. And the property of the powder frit glass is that the more they grind it to be that small, the more white it becomes. So I'm almost working blind. So I have all my color charts like that. So here's factory colors, and I know what I'm working with only by looking at the factory colors. And I consult the catalog all the time to see what I'm using. And so I've taught myself, actually in the last year or so, that I can do the sky 2 or 3 times before I fire it. I found out the hard way that the panels can only be fired at the very most any more than 5 times, and you're risking incompatibility of the glass. It doesn't want to be fired more than 5 times. And I learned the hard way. So
do you plan out your picture, so to speak, in five moments?
At the most 5 firings. I might be able to get away with 6, but I don't want to go there. And so for the sky, I'm using multiple different colors of factory powder, and I move them around with a feather or an airbrush, trying to get the variation in the sky, and then I fire that. And then if I'm happy with that, I'll move forward. If I'm not, I'll add on more powder and fire it again. And once the sky is done, I start working forward. So I might do a range of hills or a mountain. And previous to actually putting it on the sheet, I will make up what I call elements. I don't think I brought any, but I will have made up the mountains separately, fired them, cut them into the pieces that I want to do, and then I will assemble them onto the sheet. So because of the limit of 5 firings, I might do the rear ground, the distance, the mountains, and I might do the middle ground, and I might do a base color of the foreground, just so that once I get to the foreground, it won't be white. And I just keep working forward. I can stack 3 layers. I can do the background, the middle ground, the foreground in 1 firing. So my latest pieces I'm doing in no more than 4 firings. So I might have a stack of glass that's 4 layers thick. In fact, it's in the kiln right now, that I'm hoping turns out.
So it's almost as if you're making collages from pieces of glass that you make yourself, and then put them together and fire them. Because there are a lot of colors in your work.
Right. So from my blends of 2,000 blends, I've created sheets. So not only is this the formula, but I have sheets like this. And so for some of the paintings, I am actually I make small sheets, probably 8 inches by 11 inches of a lot of different colors. And I cut those up and use them as parts. So I've taught myself, I'm thinking of one piece where I did this piece in Portofino that had a boardwalk going out into the bay, and I wanted the separation of the boards. And so I made 5 different grays, and then I wanted to have the shadows in between the boards. And so I turned them, I practiced first, but I turned them upside down on the shelf, put all the various little 2x6s in there, and then I spread black powdered frit in between them, and as it melted, it seeped down in there and created the separation. Now, one of my teachers, Roger Thomas, who passed away just last year, said, don't experiment on the piece that you're making. So I practice constantly on scraps and figure out the technique I want to do and then use it in a piece.
So you know, potters have their fair share of pieces exploding in the kiln or not working out as well as they had hoped. How is your ratio of successful pieces versus pieces that are, not what you had hoped for?
Well, I wasn't going to talk about this, but several years ago I got commissioned by a client to create a diptych. At that time I only had a kiln that would do a 20 by 20, and so we wound up deciding on a 40-inch wide, 20-inch tall piece of Corvallis, Italy, where he had done a lot of business and he wanted to remind himself of that wonderful town. So he gave me a photo to work by, and I drew it all out full size, and I worked on the two pieces for 9 months. Back and forth, back and forth. It only had the one kiln, and so it was a lot of work. And prior to putting all the pieces together, of course, I made all the elements. So I had all the townhouses and the boardwalk. I created a way to make what I call wavettes and little teeny boats in the harbor and the whole shop. And after 9 months of part-time work, I called him up and said, it's ready. And he said, I can come out next Wednesday. And so prior to Wednesday, I took a look at them and they were cracking up. The pieces were breaking up after 9 months of work. And so Roger came out and we both cried, because at that time they were pretty broken up. And he asked me if I could do it again. I said, well, I'll give it a try. And I put one of them back in the kiln thinking I just hadn't heated it enough. And it turned into frib. It was total crumbles. The other one, the other side of the piece, I took to my friend Ray Algren, who was one of the founders of Bullseye Glass. He's a legend in the industry, and he lives outside of Portland. And I worked with him quite a bit and watched him do his work. And he said, well, how many times did you fire it? I said, I don't know, 15, 16. I had to get all the windowsills in of all the little townhouses, and the cobblestones, and the flower pots. I had to do it all. And he looked at me and he put his hand up and he says, 5. 5 times is the only amount of firings you can do, because the glass changes its chemistry every time you heat it up to 1485 degrees. So, since that time, I've been very careful to not do that. So I lay out the pieces, I have a sense of how many times I can fire, I keep track of every firing, and the other part in working with the kiln is speed kills. So the thicker the glass you have, the slower you have to go up. Then you can go up to the higher temperature, 1485 for 10 minutes. You come down past the vitrification range, and then you go slow. So my bigger pieces, I'm going 60 degrees an hour until it's 1155 degrees. Well, that's a lot of hours. And by doing that, my broken pile has gotten smaller and smaller.
I'm sorry to ask you a question. Yes.
So the elements that you make and have already been cooked, that doesn't count against your 5 total firings.
Well, I think it kind of counts, and that's why I'm not pushing that 5 or 6 firing limits. And when I make the elements, the buildings or the trees or all that, I'm trying to make those in one firing so that they'll only have that one firing history.
So when I listen to you, and I've listened to other artists, sometimes their greatest challenge is I can't draw hands or something like that. What is your greatest challenge? The picture, the image, or all this organization and thinking it out? And it sounds a little overwhelming, to tell you the truth.
I think my greatest challenge, the one point that I get intimidated by is looking at the sheet of white glass. And once I get started on it, drawing on it with a felt pen, which will just burn right off in the fire, once I get started, I can go. but looking at that blank sheet of white is pretty intimidating. So my newest kiln is very large. It's 27 by 52, and I have not brought myself to make a piece that size. So I use the big kiln for doing 3 or 4 pieces in it at one time. I just can't imagine the disaster that might happen if I use that one sheet of glass in that kiln.
Well, now that you mentioned that the white sheet of glass is your biggest challenge, I wanted to talk to you about your inspiration for your imagery. What is your subject matter, and how do you get there?
I love that. And this really is behind all of my work. When I was in art school, I fell in love with the French Impressionists. I just absolutely loved the fact that Monet and all his buddies could create all those paintings, a total departure from what was before them. Before the French Impressionists came along, which is, I believe, 1870 or so, the artists were doing almost photorealistic work. And along comes Monet and Seurat and Degas and all those guys, and they were wanting to give, and this is where the name came from, the impression of the work. And so we went to Paris and we saw Monet's work in the d'Orsay Museum, and I just wept. I just couldn't believe it. I was here with the work of the master. And when I started taking glass classes, I realized that frit, broken glass, is very similar to what Claude Monet said: when you go out to paint, don't paint barn, paint the impression of the barn with all the little colors in it, and let other people figure out if that's a barn or not. And I think I love Impressionism because it actually causes the viewer to be involved with the work. And that, more than anything else, has driven my artwork. At one time, I coined the website name, and it's not valid anymore, The Glass Monet. But I thought that was a little bit pompous. Just a little bit, especially since I was doing this type of work. But creating impressionistic paintings is really what I love to do. And I think glass is a perfect medium for that, because it's Monet's comment about the little dab of paint here and the little dab of paint there is exactly what you can do with glass. In fact, you have to do it with glass. You're not literally painting with a paintbrush. You're painting with little shards, little bits and pieces.
So I'm not seeing any band-aids on your hands.
Anyway.
I'm not seeing any band-aids on your hands. How do you deal with the sharpness of the edges? And I'm sure the fret could get in your skin.
I have band-aids all over the shop. There's hardly a day goes by that I don't cut my finger on something. So you have to be really careful. And I was teaching glass here about a month and a half ago, and I demonstrated that you can run your hand across a piece of freshly cut glass and nothing happens. And the students just went, and I showed them the hand, there's no blood, but you can't run your hand down the cut at all where you are bleeding.
Yeah.
So it is a situation. You can't wipe your work surface off with your hand. You can't do that. So I think after a while you just get used to that whole situation.
I want to go back to your inspiration and your subject matter. So what you're showing here is mostly landscapes and some still lifes. So what makes you decide landscape today or still life today?
Well, I get inspired by a view of what we might have seen in our travels, or a photograph that I was captured by, and I want to attempt to recreate that in the glass, of course. I'm working on a couple pieces now for a gallery in Cannon Beach that one of them is underwater, sea stars and urchins. I made 35 urchins a couple days ago. And I think it's a challenge of trying to make this piece look like what it is. Because after all, you're dealing with this really hard material that's going to get melted together. One of the photos I'm working from, the photographer took it half in and half out of the water. So you can see the urchins and the sea stars down below in his photograph, and you can see the cliffs and rocky outposts up above. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull that off or not. But I think more than anything else, it's the challenge of trying to do this and then to create the technique to do it.
Do you remember the first piece that you said, yeah, this is good, I can do this?
This is my breakthrough piece. And after doing that, then I realized I can do this. But like I say, that took 6 years. And my wife said, can't you just make a candy dish? So I bought some molds and made her, well, actually it was an ice cream dish, and I made her 4 ice cream dishes, and then went back to my experimenting.
What is the fun, the experimenting or the painting? What gets you in the studio in the morning?
Well, first of all, you're going to go and see what the kiln gave you overnight, and just I guess it's just the idea of, are you going to be able to do this in your medium and create what you think you can create? Because you might not. I have a few what I would call failures that just didn't come off. But to go out there and to see and get started, I just love it.
How long have you been doing just glass?
So I started that project where I hired the glass artists to do parts on the vanities in 2005. And then, so I saw them working, and I decided I want to do that, and it took a while to get set up and to start making colors. This is a piece that was, I entered into the 2008 Bullseye Emerge Glass International Competition, and it won recognition of the top 20 in the United States for 2008. Their competition is called Emerge. This piece is about 6 inches wide, and I think it was 9 inches tall. And yeah, thick, just a single pair, but it really kind of typified that I could do this impressionistic type of work in glass. So it sold shortly after the show for $3,000. Now, I think the people that bought it, and I was talking to Hester earlier about this, there's probably people out there who buy work just to keep artists going, because they can value the sense of the artwork and the sense of what happens in the artist. Artists are very creative people, and they want to get their work out there. So I kind of think that they probably paid too much, but I bought more glass.
It seems to me that you're having a lot of fun doing all this.
It is a lot of fun. And when I was giving glass classes, I just started a couple months ago, and I realized that for the students who were all in their 70s, to enjoy it, they had to have fun too. And in a 3-hour-long session of these ladies coming in who had never ever thought about cutting glass, were afraid of glass, and to have a piece ready for the kiln 3 or 3.5 hours later that they had made, they just absolutely loved. So I got a whole big boost just by watching them. So the fun part is doing it, creating something, and then seeing other people do it. So I think I'm going to be teaching more and more.
Yeah, I have a question here. What is the best part of your creative process? You may have answered this already a little bit, but
I think being able to create, the art of creation, like most of you here are artists, and really does something to the person inside. It gives a deep sense of satisfaction to have created something new, using your hands and your spirit, and creating this thing for other people to see. Whether they like it or not, it doesn't really matter. The fact that you created it is, I think, the point of art.
you know, I don't have much to say about that. I thought that was very well put. But what is the worst part of your creative process?
Well, obviously that piece that broke. I don't think there is a worst part. It just, to me, I just absolutely love doing what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm at a really good point in my life where we're enjoying ourselves and creating art, so there isn't a bad side. I'm constantly looking at things as if I could create that in glass. And so you look around, you see, I saw this really weird bug on the sidewalk this morning. Took a walk in the rain, and I'm thinking, could I do that?
So I was going to ask you, what is your next project? What is that project that you have in that big kiln right now? Or is it going to be bug?
Well, I think it's typical of our artists that the piece you're working now is your best piece. And I actually have 4 pieces in that big kiln. And I'm really looking forward to opening that thing up when we get back and seeing what the kiln gave me. You're always wanting to do more. I think it might be a failure because I'm not going to create this underwater scene. I want it to feel like water, so I'm trying to figure out how I can make it feel like water, like a skin diver is looking through, or just looking at the tide pools is really what it is. But that's a really driving force, is to see where you're going with that.
Well, I usually have the last question, and I neglected to warn you about that last question. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. What if money and size was something you would not have to think about? What is the artwork that you would like to own? And the owning bit is important because it means you would be wanting to have that around you permanently.
Wow, I haven't really thought of that. I love artists' artwork. I love watercolor paintings. If I were to collect other people's work, it would be watercolor paintings. The fact that the watercolorist can just put that wash on. Well, let me back up. 2 years ago, we spent 3 months in Scottsdale, Arizona. For the first time, we did a snowbird thing. And in preparation for that, I knew I wouldn't have my work. I wouldn't have my kiln. I wouldn't have my glass. What am I going to do? So I took watercolor classes in Central Oregon from Winnie Jabot, who turns out she won Best of Show in the Watercolor Society work, and a fabulous teacher and a great watercolor painter. And I had never really taken watercolor classes, and I was stunned by how easy it is to mix the colors. You know, within seconds you can have a bright yellow go into a yellow wash, where it would take me 3 or 4 days to create that in glass, and it might not even work. So when we went down to Scottsdale, I took more watercolor classes and produced some watercolor. In fact, there's a piece here in the show, the still life fruit bowl is based on a watercolor I did while in Scottsdale. So it was kind of fun that it can actually work back and forth between the watercolor and the glass. So if I were to collect, besides maybe a Monet,
Monet would be fine.
no limit,
No limits.
it would be a Monet,
Okay.
any of them.
Well, and now I would like to thank you and the audience for being here. You are probably the most joyous artist we've had doing one of these talks. It's a delight to see somebody having so much fun making art. That is just perfect. So please keep doing it, and if the glass becomes too much, there's always watercolor.
Thank you, Hester.
Thank you.